our first players and media panel. So I'm gonna now move everyone into the new room. All right, and Sauerbrunn. All right, so I think everybody should be here. Yeah, there's everybody. Now, before we get started, before I hand it over to Shaw, I'll just quickly introduce our panel here today. Harry Shipp had a 7-year professional playing career in the MLS, retiring this past season with the Seattle Sounders, and he's currently pursuing an MBA degree at Northwestern University. Second, we have Danielle Slaton, who's an analyst and sideline reporter with NBC Sports, Fox Sports, and Pac-12 Networks. She's a former professional player for the Carolina Courage and for Olympique Lyon in France, and also competed with the U.S. women's national team, medaling in the 2000 Olympics and the 2003 World Cup. Third, we have Becky Sauerbrunn, who currently plays for the Portland Thorns in the NWSL. Becky is a 4-time NWSL Defender of the Year and also has a decorated international career herself. She is the former co-captain of the U.S. women's national team, a 2012 Olympic gold medalist, and a 2-time World Cup champion. Fourth on our panel is Maurice, who's currently a soccer analyst at Fox Sports. Maurice is a former professional player, spending 5 years at Rangers in Scotland and 4 years at Stoke City, ending his career in the MLS in Philadelphia. He featured for the U.S. men's national team in the 2008 Olympics and the 2010 World Cup as well. And finally, we have Shaw Brown, who will be moderating the panel. Shaw is a University of Michigan graduate, go Blue, and an Emmy Award-winning broadcast producer, previously spending time with ESPN, Fox Soccer, and NBC Sports, covering events including the World Cup, the Euros, the MLS Gold Cup, and the Confederations Cup. So I want to thank all of our panelists for being here today. And Shaw, I'm going to hand it over to you and let you take over.
Jacob, thanks. Hey, everybody. Harry, thanks for joining my good group of friends with us. I appreciate it. Let's get right into it. Mo, let's start with you because we talk constantly. But let's just start looking back first and just your soccer hero growing up. What made you want to be a soccer player?
If I'm being honest, well, first of all, good to see everyone. Hope everyone's doing well during these crazy times. I was introduced to soccer at a very young age. Both of my parents are Nigerian, so soccer is the sport there. So for as long as I can remember, a ball has been around me, a ball has been in my house. So if I had to be honest, my first soccer hero would probably be my dad, because he was the one who introduced me to the game. He was my first coach. He was my coach all the way throughout my career, pretty much. And then from there, obviously, you start getting introduced to the international game. You start seeing whether it's U.S. national team players or players abroad. And I was a big fan of Arsenal growing up. So naturally, I gravitated towards those players. So I would say guys from that team, like the Ian Wrights, the Patrick Vieira's. Patrick Vieira probably a lot more because he's someone who played my position, someone I could see similarities in my game to his. And I think those would be the ones who kind of set the starting points for me and my introduction into the game.
Danielle, I think your son's going to say you growing up, but who would you say?
You know, I'm the old person in the group here. So to be honest, the first time I really saw women's soccer on television, I was 16. Man, that was the 96 Olympics for me. So I didn't have a ton of women's soccer role models growing up. And when you're on the West Coast, you didn't watch European soccer because the time change was such a big difference. So if I'm being completely honest, I wanted to be Jackie Joyner-Kersee and Ronnie Lott when I grew up. For reals, like those were the people that I had on my walls and stuff. But as I was introduced to the game, I mean, I think Michelle Akers, no doubt, is the foundation of the U.S. women's national team. Like when you're hear from Becky and, the core, I believe still of who we are and the grit and the fight, like that was established by her in the 90s. And so when I look back to the real icons of the game and the women who I think are the best, top of the list and real role models even today, she's number one on my list for sure.
Becky, different era. Sorry, Danielle, we're both I'm in your era if it makes you feel better. But for you, who was it?
I have to go with Danielle. I think Michelle Akers, obviously. And then for me, my first experience watching the women's national team was the 1999 Women's World Cup. I actually got to go to a game in Chicago. And the player that really drew my eye was Carla Overbeck. And at that point, I'm like 14. I already know I'm a defender. And just watching her and the presence that she had and the confidence and the way that she was organizing everybody and everyone listened to her. You could see it. It was such like a tangible presence. For me, she was definitely someone that I wanted to emulate.
Harry, where would you go with this?
Yeah, it's funny. I was actually also at a 99 Women's World Cup game in Chicago. But unrelated to that, I think, I think when I was 7 is when like the fire first started. My parents, neither of them played soccer or anything growing up. So like I was kind of like introducing myself to soccer as I grew up. And I used to go to like a ton of fire games starting when I was 7, 8 years old. And I loved like Peter Novak, Dima Kovalenko, like some of those early fire guys. And then when I was 9, I went and spent some of a summer in Barcelona playing. So I kind of just like fell in love with Barcelona, and like Andres Iniesta was like always my favorite player growing up. So that was like someone for probably 10 years. It was like everything Iniesta did, I tried to emulate. So that was probably mine.
Harry, I'll stay with you. We're in an international week right now. U.S. national team played for the first time since February, which is crazy. I'm curious what your thoughts were seeing the U.S. play. It's been a long 3 years, I would say, for U.S. men's fans, and just like how quickly the fans' opinions, as well as just people who are involved in the game, can change when they see a young team go out there and at least knock it about.
You're asking me? Sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
Yeah.
Okay. Actually, like honestly, I did not watch, and partly because I'm in school now and I literally do stuff for 15 hours a day, all day, every day. And I haven't watched a single sporting event in probably 2 months, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So no, I mean, I saw the highlights. I saw they tied. Honestly, until like the day before, I didn't even realize that national team stuff was coming back because I've been so invested in this kind of very non-soccer world for a couple months. But I think, just looking at that lineup and the team, I think it's like you're in this transitionary period. And like, obviously I never personally played with the national team and don't have experience with that. But I think as someone now who's just watching, I think like seeing a new generation of guys who's like 17 through 22 is super exciting to kind of see how that develops over the next 10 years.
Mo, you were part of a transition, right? When Bob took over. And obviously we're now in a completely different world where we're looking at a team that's got to qualify. Like what's your initial thoughts on what you saw? And obviously a long way to go, but like just the transition of it all and your thoughts on the young players coming in.
Yeah, I would say I'm optimistic. I like the group that they have there. And when you deal with transition, it's always a tricky thing. And I think sometimes people don't get a full understanding of how that process works. So when you talk about transition, when I came into the team, I came into the national team and there was probably 5 or 6 guys that came into camp with me when we were all getting our first camp. And in that process, there's about 9, 10 names that are already inked into the lineup, and we're all competing to be that +1, that one person who maybe gets a start, or you're fighting just to come off the bench. And so to look at this team now and to see this shift, the amount of young players who are leading that transition, not having many veteran guys who are ushering them along and, really instilling in them what it means to be on the national team, what it takes, whenever you put that jersey on, whenever you wear that crest, what that means. I give these guys a lot of credit because they're learning on the fly. They're learning just through their own experiences. They're coming together as a group of players. So what I saw in that game against Wales was really encouraging, especially from the last game that we saw, or the last Gold Cup that we watched. To see this group of players, I was inspired. And then when you look at it from a global standpoint as well, these guys are going to big European clubs and not just knocking on the door. They're going in there, kicking that door open and demanding a place in the starting lineup. And I give them a lot of credit. It takes a lot of courage to do that. They could opt for an easier choice, which maybe to go to a smaller club and, navigate your way that way. But they're raising the bar. They're challenging each other. They're raising the bar for soccer in this country. And so I'm proud of these young group of players. I think there's still a long way to go, but what I saw in that game was encouraging. And I know as they get more games together, they play in some more competitions, they're only going to get better, and it bodes well for our future.
Becky, I know you're a men's fan too. Thoughts on not just the young group of players that are in, but also just like in general, what you saw, and from a point of view of a women's player that has young players coming in trying to take your position, as well as trying to bring them into part of the mix to help you win games.
Yeah, I think really Maurice said it well, that these young players are coming in without the benefit of those players that have gone through some of these major tournaments and like really struggled and know what it takes to compete at the highest level consistently day in and day out. And so I'm really excited to see these young guys, the best of them with the best of MLS, and really see how they come together and get on the same page. Because I feel like with the national team, so much of your success is, can you get everyone on the same page as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible? And so you're going through a transition, you're adding all this new talent, you're going to bring in other talent. And really it's like, can you get a style of play down and get those players to buy in? And I'm really excited because it looks like you've got players that have the talent and have the tactical IQ to be able to do those things. And so I'm really excited for this new ushering in of era for the men's national team.
Danielle, I see you nodding. How hard was it for you when you joined the women's team to kind of get up to speed? And then look, you cover MLS, you've been around the men's game a lot in your life, like what you're seeing and how important it is for the U.S. men's team to be a good team and for fans in this country.
It's incredibly important. But as everyone kind of has echoed, I saw some real bright spots. I have to give credit to Greg Berhalter in that, he wanted to play out the back. That's his MO. He wants to play out the back. And when things were a little bit rough over the past year, there were lots of questions. Does he have the players to do that? Should he continue to do that? Well, they played out of the back pretty darn well. And I thought that was a very promising thing out of the game the other night against Wales. I don't think, this is kind of a little bit of a bold statement, but I don't think there's any reason that we shouldn't be very ambitious. And I'm going to just say it, like, there's no reason that the U.S. men's national team should not compete for a World Cup championship in 2026. It is going to be on our home soil. You see the young players. Yes, there is a freaking long way to go. Like, don't get it twisted. Like, there is so much work to be done, but there's no reason we can't think ambitiously. I think on the women's side, we have that expectation. The women's team should win the World Cup every year. Like, is that going to happen? No, but that's what we expect. And I don't think that, given what we're starting to see, given the young players, given the talent combined with the IQ, combined with the athleticism, I don't think that there's any reason that we shouldn't start to have that swagger and start to take the steps to get there. It's going to be on our home soil in 2026. Let's go for it. Why not?
Becky is our resident World Cup winner. What are your thoughts about that?
About 2026 for the men?
Yeah.
Why not? Really, like, anything can happen in a major tournament. You get going and everyone's in form and you're feeling confident, and like nothing can stop you. Like, on any given day, you never know with soccer. That's why we love it so much. And so, yeah, absolutely. If would love for them to win in 2026. And do I think they have a chance? Absolutely.
Mo, you were part of a team that had a run at a World Cup that I think probably feels like they could have gone farther, and a lot of players were in form at the right time as they took off, even the year before in 2009. What does it take? What is something like that? How does something like that come together?
Well, a little bit of it is luck, that's a big part of it, but Becky and Danielle hit on it. When you look at this group of players, what I see in them is obviously there's the skill component, there's a tactical component, but then there's also the mental component, like the belief that you don't care who's lining up against you, that the guys that are lining up next alongside you, you're going to go out there and compete. And when I look at this group of players, I get that feeling. And I don't know if it's me just being boyishly excited about this group of players or whatnot, but I look at them, and for lack of better description, they have that kind of that FU mentality, right? Where Danielle was hinting at it, we're talking about playing with a little bit more of a swagger and a little bit more confidence and that bravado. And you're starting to see that. And I don't know if that's because these guys are lining up at these big clubs around Europe, playing in Champions League week in and week out. There's that competitive element every single day in training where you have to go out there and prove yourself. You're only as good as your last day of training. And I think when you look at the national team, obviously, like I said, it's going to take a little bit of time to really come together and everyone to find their feet. But I look at their personalities and I get a good sense. I get a good vibe from them. When I see some of the things that Weston does, or Tyler Adams being back in the team now, Serginho Dest, they play with this chip on their shoulder that's contagious. And when you're in a group like that, your game is raised by the man or the woman next to you, because you don't want to be the one that lets your team down, and your confidence grows as your confidence in your teammates grows. And I look at this group, and I could go off on a tangent with this, but I echo their sentiments that the sky should be the limit for this group, and not even looking past 2022. They should go into that tournament feeling confident, obviously qualifying first, but they should go into that tournament feeling confident. A lot of young, good, talented players coming up. And 2026, yes, the bar should be raised. The bar should be set. It's on our home soil. There's a lot of factors that go into winning a World Cup, as they can attest to. But I think this group of players will mature by then. And I have a lot of confidence in this group. Maybe I don't want to raise the bar too high for them, or, start putting too much pressure on their shoulders. I want them to just enjoy their football and grow into their roles. But I look at this group, and I personally am confident in them.
Danielle, how different is it for these kind of players coming in as opposed to someone like you came in with Mia Hamm there and Christine Lilly, and like you guys have talked about having these people that you kind of had to help guide you. At the moment, that's not happening, and not to say it won't during qualifying, but like, how different is it for that to happen? If you had gone in and you were, top of your class and there wasn't anyone older to guide you, like, how would your career have been different?
That's a good question. And I don't know. I mean, I definitely had the mental challenge of, oh my gosh, this woman was on a poster on my wall in my bedroom when I was a teenager, and now I'm supposed to try to mark her? Like, are you kidding me? What? And so, you learned from that. You soaked in that experience, and you tried to learn as much as you could from their experience. There's also that intimidation factor too, right? That you're extra nervous and you're trying to keep your emotions in check, and make sure you can thrive. I think if there's a benefit from not having that veteran leadership around, it's that you just don't know any better. Like, you're playing with just this naive freedom of like, okay, have Andres Iniesta across from me, but like, whatever, like, let's just go, So there's a little bit of freedom that comes with that naivete, if you will. And all you can do is just take advantage of the situation in front of you. So these guys are going to have to step up and become their own leaders. And the reality is that they're learning from leaders that might not be on the national team, that are, in Barcelona or in Europe or at Chelsea or wherever it might be. So they're getting their experience in other ways. They're just going to have to apply it to this particular environment and circumstance. And, maybe there's something to be said about that there's going to have to shoulder more responsibility. And so they're going to grow up quicker and faster.
Harry, what about you? When you came into the Chicago Fire, how was a young player coming into an established team? How hard is it for you? And like, how do you perceive like jumping in and saying, look, I'm going to take a spot, whether they like me or not?
Yeah, I think for me, it was almost easier in the sense that like our team wasn't very good, at least hadn't been the last couple of years. And I think there had been so much turnover. And I was this guy like coming out of college, had just won a national championship. Like, I was like top of the world, whatever that means at that point in time. So it's like, I didn't even think about it. And like, I didn't like set these expectations for myself where it's like, I have to be starting by X game of the season, or like I have to be, one of the best rookies in the year. Like, I kind of just came in and was like, I'm just going to have fun. Like, I have no expectation for what my professional soccer career is going to be. So let's just like see how year one goes and then take it from there. So I think like me not putting pressure on myself in that first year, like made it super easy just to like not care and play super well, and just like ended up like, establishing myself and playing a good amount those first couple of years, which I think like helped, the next like build to the next stage of my career.
Becky, let's move to a little NWSL. It's been a crazy year, obviously, for everybody, but NWSL was kind of the first ones back, which was awesome, so that they were able to get out in front of everything. I'm curious how this year has helped NWSL, or let's go just helped. How has this year actually ended up helping the league?
Well, I think I saw a stat somewhere that viewership for the NWSL is up over 400%. And so I think getting out there early before all the other sports league, putting on a tournament, being on CBS, getting onto the big channels, I think that really helped with viewership. And with that, I think that comes with sponsor interest. And so I think for this year with, Lisa Baird coming on as the new commissioner, getting a little bit more staffed up in the front office, a little bit more organized. I think it felt like the trajectory of the NWSL is really going up. And even though this year has been bizarre and tragic and wild, I think for the NWSL, I think we stayed firm. And I don't think, I mean, it was just such a weird year. So I just have to think that what we did this year will benefit us and has built a foundation for us to grow from in the years to come.
Danielle, what do you think?
I think it was such a joy to be able to watch the NWSL get kicked off first, right? Like that. I mean, so I had a kid in February, and I remember thinking when all of the sports went away, I was like, wait a minute, I have a kid, I'm up at all hours and there's no sports to watch on television. Like, what kind of messed up God is this that isn't gonna allow me to watch soccer where all I can do is sit at home, right? And then the NWSL comes back and I'm like, thank you. So I think that there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of progress. I think, Becky talked about the play on the field and the sponsorships and television. You see the expansion. I mean, there's been a lot of buzz around Angel City and a new LA franchise. Big moves in terms of the expansion, and Tobin Heath and Kristen Press going to Louisville, or getting at least the rights are taken by Louisville to them. So I think there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of positive talk around it. And I think that that's really, really critical for women's soccer, but women's sports in general. I think we're kind of right on the cusp when it comes to women's soccer. And I feel like 10 years from now is what we're going to look at in the NWSL in the way that we looked at Major League Soccer, like in the late 90s. I think we're right on that cusp. And if we can keep building, it's going to be a really, really exciting time over the next decade for women's soccer.
Harry, what about you, for someone who played in the men's side of this, watching the women's national team? Obviously, everyone has. It's impossible not to when they're winning so much. But what about something like NWSL and its trajectory in your eyes?
Yeah, I think for me, I think kind of like they mentioned, like getting on national TV, is a huge first step. And it was something that even as it was coming back, I watched a couple of the games that were on, and that was something before realistically, it was hard unless I was I went to a couple of Red Stars games when I was in Chicago, but it was hard for me to just find access to it. So having the access is a huge first step. I think for me, I grew up with sisters that played soccer growing up. I had two younger sisters. So I was always, more partial to women's soccer than maybe some guys on the side, because they were watching it. So I was always around watching it. So to have a league beyond just the national team players, which is who were their idols growing up, I think is super important in all these cities where girls are growing up playing. And kind of I was talking about for the national team growth, I really look forward to the next 10 years and kind of now that I'm removed from the sport, kind of just standing back and watching that stuff grow.
Becky, how does it help the U.S. national team get better, right? We talk, I remember having a conversation with Danielle after the Spain game, and a nail biter for us. You might have thought you had it the whole time, but just the way that they played football compared to the U.S. And I'm curious, how the NWSL and its trajectory will help the U.S. women's team, and unfortunately other national teams for that matter, get better.
Yeah, I think it's just the competition week in and week out. You're training with the best players every single day. You have an organized team that you go to every morning. You get full training in. I mean, when I wasn't playing in a professional league, I was having to find that on my own. I'm training by myself on a random turf field in Washington, So I think having structure, having the competition, having world-class players around you, and then having the NWSL attract world-class players from overseas. And so you're playing against that, you're learning, how they play the game. And so I think just having that competition just keeps upping the level. And so, like you said, you see all these other professional leagues, all these major teams investing in women's teams. I mean, I watched the Manchester Derby this morning, and just to see the style of play and how the quality of it, I think what we need the NWSL to keep doing this and to keep offering this for the players, because the rest of the world is catching up. And that's great. I think that's great for women's soccer. We just have to make sure, as a domestic league, as the American team, that we keep upping our level as well.
Mo, you got a chance to play in MLS, and you've seen, you went away in the middle of it and came back. So I'm sure you saw the change in level. But what have you noticed in MLS's trajectory over the last few years too, as someone who's covering the sport too?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, similar to the period when I'd started off in the league and then left and came back, it's just you're just seeing more and more growth, and that growth is happening in different ways now. Obviously, expansion is still gone on, and you're seeing more franchises coming around. But I think the impact of or how the league targets different European countries or just targets the global market is a lot different now. The shift is starting to change from attracting players at the tail end of their career maybe and having them come over here, you know, instead of targeting the likes of like a Rafa Marquez and older generation type players. There's a shift. Now you're starting to see players coming in the prime, a guy like Carlos Vela, or you're seeing younger players like a Diego Rossi. And I think the league is taking on an image of being comfortable with being potentially a selling league, which I think there might have been a stigma beforehand that shouldn't be what it needs to be. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. To be able to bring players here, younger players here, and let this be a starting point to kickstart their career and then sell them on. And having that blend of young players, experienced players in their prime, I think overall the image that it relays to the rest of the world, it shows that players can be developed here. A lot of these young players who are playing for the national team and playing at big clubs now, they started their careers here. A guy like Tyler Adam, the trajectory that he's on, but the starting point. I remember, Shaw, we've had this conversation numerous times, but I remember the first time I saw this kid play, 16-year-old kid, and just the thing that impressed me the most, again, was his mentality. He just didn't care. Like, he would lose the ball and he's sitting there barking at his teammates to give him the ball again. But I think that's starting to be drilled into the mindset of our younger players because they have a platform. They have the academy systems that's feeding them into the first team. So what's being learned at the first team level is the same thing that's being taught all the way through the different channels and through to the academy. And I think what's beautiful about that is, one, these players are getting better coaching, but two, I know when I was a young player, the people that I aspired to be like were so far away from me. So my dream at times seems far-fetched because I couldn't touch it. I was seeing it through this screen right here, which sometimes can be devastating because it doesn't seem realistic to you. Whereas these kids now, the guys that they look up to, some of the guys that are in the first team are a field away from them. So I think that elevation and that structure now that really exists within MLS, where there's academies across the board, I think are super impactful, not just for the league, but for the national team as well going forward.
Danielle, for someone who covers the league at a national level and at a club level, what kind of responsibility do you have to be honest about it, but also help promote this league?
Yeah, I would say probably the hardest thing about being in media, particularly when you're working for a club. So I cover the San Jose Earthquakes locally, in addition to sometimes doing national broadcast. And the hardest part of my job, actually, this was hard when I was in Chicago too, because Harry, I was covering the Chicago Fire when you just came out. And as you mentioned, your team wasn't very good at that time as well. And the hardest thing to do is to walk that line of being honest and calling out bad soccer when you see it, and calling it what it is, while also being respectful of the players, respectful of the club, and respectful of the game in general. And so, to me, I think I always approach it from a perspective of, look, what I'm asking of these players is hard. I know it. I've been out there on the field. I know that I am demanding for that one-touch ball to be perfect when I call it out. And so I always approach it from that respect of, like, it's hard, but you're a professional and you still should do it. And so I think that that's kind of how I try to find that balance of walking that line. But to me, my integrity is incredibly important. I think that's what enables you to stay in media for as long as you possibly can. And so you have to call it out. And I think it's even harder when maybe you're a former player. Mo, you can speak to this, right? Like that. It's hard to call out your former teammates when they mess up or they do something wrong, but you have to. And your job when you're in the media is to the fan, to the viewer. And so you have to understand that perspective and be able to kind of bounce back and forth and wear those different hats all at the same time.
Mo, jump right in.
Yeah, no, I was just, when she said that, again, Shaw, we've had this conversation when I first came into this space, was how do you navigate that? And when I look back on my career, when I was young, of course, I was maybe a little bit sensitive and read too much of the media and was too hypercritical of them when they were hypercritical of me, when they were just doing their job and being honest. But as you grow and you go through your career and you recognize and you start taking accountability, you can appreciate that. You walk up the pitch, we can all attest to that. You walk up the pitch and you know what your performance has been like. And if you can look your teammates in the eye and know, look, I left it all out there. We all compete. Like, you're going to have good days, you're going to have bad days. But as long as you know what you did and you can be honest with yourself, then whatever the media writes, you're not really that bothered by. So me and the media side of it now, I've taken that approach. Look, as long as I'm just being honest about the player's performance, I'm not diving into their personal life. I'm not trying to relate anything that's happening in their personal life or anything like that to why their performance was what it was on the field. Then I feel like I can look any of my former teammates in the face and after the game and have no issue with it. And I think they respect that as well. As long as they know that my critique was fair, it's fair to the game. And like Danielle said, your allegiance shifts. You have to be honest to the viewer, because as soon as you start trying to baby a certain player or protect a certain player, well, you lose credibility, and without credibility, then you have nothing in this position. So yeah, I just know when I was playing and I got to a level of maturity with myself, the only times I ever felt like aggrieved by the media was if I felt like it was a personal attack. And so I try to just make sure I avoid that, keep it solely focused on the game and be honest to the viewer, be honest to the sport.
Harry, the other side of that, as a player being criticized or getting plaudits, like how hard is it to focus or get involved, or do you care?
I would say I'm someone that, like, I really never cared. Like, I was never why I got in. It's not like why I played professional soccer. Like, I didn't do it for, I would have been just as happy playing for 0 people versus 50,000 people. And like, I witnessed a lot of guys, like, careers kind of get derailed because of like having all this information come from outside stuff, and like witnessing that, I think I became like hypersensitive to not letting that happen to me. So it was like something where like I didn't even follow, like when I was playing in like Fire, Montreal and Sounders, like I didn't even follow those clubs on social media. Like I just stayed like, I wanted my social media to be so anti-soccer, like nothing could like potentially like, because like Mo saying, like I knew I was the first one who knew like after a game, like if I played bad or good, like I don't need someone to tell me, because like I know that, like I don't need my parents even to tell me that, because like I know. So I think for me, like it was just something that I tried to stay far away from, and like not let it affect how I went about doing my like job day after day.
Becky, what about you, who's currently still playing? And look, when Mo started and Danielle started, social media is way different than where we are now.
Yeah, so I would just say that, I mean, what these guys both said, very true. I think you need to know yourself, and are you going to be affected by what you read? I know going into major tournaments, a lot of the younger players or newer players on the team just delete social media because they just know that whatever they read, good or bad, it's going to affect them. And me as a player who's never been super confident, I've tried so hard not to take any sort of confidence from good or bad from what I read in social media. And so luckily, as I've gotten older, it's been easier to kind of shed that off. But I can totally understand where these former players come from when it comes to having to shift your allegiance a little bit. I can imagine that's a little difficult, but I will say, as someone who's still a player, I've never been offended by one of my former teammates critiquing me on the field, because I will always be my worst critic. And whatever you say, I've said way worse to myself.
Fair enough. Becky, I'm curious, when you come into camp, I hear often that the hardest game the U.S. women's players play are against each other, because it's so you're fighting. Every last second of it's a fight when you're in camp. Is it true? And what's it like? Like, what's an actual game day like when you're playing each other?
Oh man, I'll tell you, once we get that email with the tentative schedule, the first thing you're looking at is, 1, if you've got fitness testing, and 2, if there's an inter squad. And so honestly, the inter squads, they're like NWSL games on steroids. It's just like transition after transition. You're running like over 10 miles, you're getting tackled, it's wild. It's honestly like, I really do feel, I know Ali Krieger said this during the World Cup, that our like second U.S. women's national team could probably compete and win a major tournament. And honestly, I don't doubt that. And I'm not saying that because it's arrogant. I will just say that the depth of talent in the U.S. when it comes to the women's side it's ridiculous. I mean, anytime you play an inter squad, it's absolute madness because you're obviously playing against some of the best in the world, and then you're also competing for a spot. And so every single day at camp is basically like that. You're being evaluated, you have to perform, and you're competing day in and day out.
Danielle?
Yeah, I mean, like I think about that. Like when I think about that, I think about in an inter squad, I've had a broken nose. I've had ripped jerseys. I've had like, I don't even know how many lost toenails. I mean, you kind of think about all of the stuff in those games. For sure, it's intense. It always has been. I mean, I look back to Michelle Akers and kind of give her credit for that level of intensity and how that's trickled down over the years. And I think that what I try to convey to people who haven't had the chance to be at the women's national team level is it's like going to practice or going to your job, whatever it might be, right? In television or at, a tech company or whatever it might be. It's like going to your job and every single day thinking that tomorrow you might not have that job. And that's how you have to play. And that's how you have to compete at your job on that day. And so people are going to throw it all on the line. It's hard. It's stressful. But I think that's part of the reason that the women's national team has been so successful, that if you can't handle that stress, if you're not fired up by that level of competition, you're not going to survive on the women's national team for very long. And I mean, credit to someone like Becky, who's been there for, I don't know, like decades probably now, that mentality is part of what enables her to thrive in that environment and continue to propel the women's national team to where it is now.
Mo, I once got told by Jermaine Jones that if the person who thinks he's going to come take my job thinks it's going to be easy, then he's not going to have any legs left after training. Is that how it was for you guys too?
That's how it should be. I hearing these stories right now, it's crazy to me because I know when we were covering the Women's World Cup, we were trying to piece together a starting lineup and itself was difficult, right? So I can only imagine what the competition is actually like within camp. But to Jermaine's comment, that's how it should be, right? When I know the last World Cup when the U.S. didn't qualify, social media, the U.S. soccer fan base, everyone is screaming, just throw away this team and just bring in new players. I personally was of the mindset like, no, like I get it. There's disappointment, there's frustration, 100%. I was frustrated, I was disappointed, just like everybody else was, let down, so many different emotions. But I don't think that that's the way that it should happen. I still think that there needs to be that transition period. And it's like, if you want this job, yes, bring them into camp, but you come take this job from me. If I'm still the best man for the job, okay, I failed. I had a poor performance. We let the country down, let the team down. But if he's not better than me, he shouldn't just be given this position just because of graduation, basically. No, he needs to come in and take that. And every team that I've been on, I think that's kind of been the ethos of the team, where you come in and you want the position, you come in and you take it. When I was a rookie, I went into a team where this is the first year, but I was competing against veterans and it was that mentality. And I think throughout the course of my career, that's how it's been. Sometimes I was able to get into the team earlier than others, but sometimes I had to wait. When I first went to Rangers, I was on a high playing in Toronto and, one of the first names on the team sheet and feeling really good and excited to just leaving the Olympics and then making that move. So I was excited and thinking it was just going to be smooth sailing from there. The trajectory was just going to keep going just like that. But no, I went there and starting from the ground again. I went a couple months before I really solidified my spot or broke into the team. And then even then it was still like bit part here and there. Every day is a grind. Every day you're proving yourself. You're buddy with the person you're competing against in the locker room. But as soon as you guys get on that pitch, you have a point to prove and you have to take advantage of that. You have to take that opportunity every single day. Can't take it for granted whatsoever.
Harry, as a former player in MLS, what do you find the big questions are, whether you're in class or out in the world about MLS? Because it's shifted, right? I mean, this league has shifted. The fan culture shifted. The way the games are played has shifted. Like, what do you find yourself answering more now than you did when you played?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy because even like there's so many more people than I thought like would be here. Like we have a class of like 550 and like I've met a decent number of them and like way more of them followed MLS than I ever would have imagined, like obviously to varying degrees. but like 10 years ago, like I don't think people would have even known like what MLS was in like in a class like this, where like unless they were like happen to be coming from a world of soccer. So I don't know, like that part alone is like super encouraging for me. I don't know, just like having people just ask questions, or like knowing a lot of players that like I had played with, along like be like, oh, you were in Seattle in 2017. So like you played with Clint, like just even knowing that, like putting that link together, like how was playing with Clint? Like I didn't think that was something I would get asked, being completely removed from the soccer world. So for me, it's been kind of like exciting to retell some of those stories.
A little bit more off the pitch for all of you. Danielle, how important to you was it of being a role model, not just on the pitch, but off the pitch while you were playing, and even now as you're commentating on it?
I think it's incredibly important. I don't know where that comes from. I think it was maybe that the women's national team, when I joined, they were always really big role models and shouldered the responsibility of really being the face of women's sports in the 90s and early 2000s, and really being some of the first role models that little girls, but also little boys could have in the game. And so I think I followed in their footsteps. Today, it's incredibly important to me to continue to be that role model. I think it comes from a place of, look, I know who I am, and not everybody's going to love me, but I'm confident in who I am and what I do. I think particularly being a Black woman, I think that's even more important. My role being on television, that there's not a ton of people that look like me. So me and my curly hair and my crazy attitude, that's important for people and young girls, especially who look like me, to be able to see themselves and envision themselves doing whatever they want to do, and perhaps following in my footsteps.
Becky, what about you as a player that's still on the pitch, that plays for the most successful national team, men or women? What's your calling with that? Like, how responsible do you have to be about that part of it too?
I think you have to be really responsible. It's a mantle that's been passed down from the generations that have come before us. And so, like Danielle said, you just try to live and be authentic and do the right things. And I'm lucky with the national team that I'm surrounded by very strong, intelligent women that fight for things and have an opinion about things and are brave enough to voice those opinions. And yeah, sometimes it can be divisive, but at least we're standing for something. And so for me, I think it's an honor to be able to fight for those things with the women around me.
Mo, what about you, I know this year has been crazy off the pitch with the things that have happened, and you've been part of kind of the movement in MLS too. So just the responsibility that you held as a player, and now as a commentator and as someone who's out in the media world.
I think it's a huge responsibility, and whether you initially accept it or not, it's there. And you have to, at some point you come to terms and you realize that there's no shunning this. You need to embrace it. You need to recognize the platform you have to enact change. As we're all fighting to bring awareness to the sport and try to spread and open the door for more inclusion in the sport, I think then my role becomes even more important. Like Danielle was saying, whether it's in the media space, in the soccer space, growing up, I didn't see too many that looked like me. I didn't see too many that sounded like me. There was the idea of me being a commentator or analyst that was never, when you first started talking to me, Shaw, about media side of things, I was thinking more so I wanted to be an actor, like a movie star. And that was my entrance into the TV world. So when I come into the media world side of things, I embrace it full on, because I recognize, like Danielle said, I have a unique voice. There might be kids who are flicking through channels and they pause for a second on a soccer game that I'm calling or that I'm in the studio for, and they see me, and whether it's how I dress, whether it's how I speak, whatever it is, whatever they gravitate towards initially, if that's their entry point to the sport, I've done my job, and I'm proud of that. And I embrace that and I welcome that. And then even from the playing standpoint, the guys before me, they paved the way and they opened the door and they created the opportunity for me to go and have a European career. I look at guys closer to me in generations, guys like Aguchi and Yewu or like DeMarcus Beasley. Those are guys that I grew up watching. And then I was fortunate enough to be able to play alongside them and then call them friends and pick their brains about what their experience was. So as I made my European adventure, I had that in the back of my mind. Like, look, everything that I'm doing is in some way paving the way and opening a door for those that are going to follow. So I like to believe that guys like Tyler Adams and your Weston McKinney's and these guys that are doing well in Europe will look back and say, like, yeah, you know, I appreciate the way that they went out there and maybe against the grain in some ways, shape or form, but they created a path for us to now go out there and have success, and they embrace it as well. And I think they do that. I think they recognize who they are. They recognize the platform they have, and they're using their voices and trying to enact change in their own different ways. So I think all of us here on the panel, all of us in the sport, all of us who have a platform have a role to play. Is it going to be the same across the board? No. Is it going to have the same impact? No. But I think there is a role for us all to play in enacting change and helping to grow this game and making more inclusion for this sport.
I'm going to go all the way over the other side of this and get away from responsibility and just have a little fun here. Harry, most memorable goal you ever scored from when you were
most
3
memorable goal?
in your professional career?
Oh gosh.
It's
There was
coming to
one.
everybody, so start thinking.
There was one playing in Chicago when we played in Seattle, actually, and I like chopped up Chad Marshall, who's like one of my best friends, and scored. And then we played together for a couple of years, and I still, like, to this day, give him a hard time about it. So that's probably my favorite.
Becky.
Okay, well, there's not many
goal scorer that you are.
Yeah. Okay, so I've never scored for the national team, so we'll go back to professional. There was a game when I was playing for Utah Royals. We were playing the Portland Thorns, and I actually scored against the team that I eventually joined. And I like to think it was kind of the demise of their season, but I think that's just hyperbole.
Danielle, what do you got?
Oh, I like Becky. I mean, this is a bad question. Hey, look at the defenders you have on this panel, Shah. I can't even think of a great goal that I scored, but I can think of a time when I stopped Abby Wambach from scoring when I was in college, and we were playing in the Final Four against Florida, and it was a corner kick, and I had the responsibility of marking her. And, you know, she's climbing all over me because she's like 7 feet tall, and, you know, she's incredible in the air. And somehow I didn't even like go up to jump for the ball. I just jumped into her because I knew she was going to win it. But if I could just maybe not make her win it like she wanted to, and then she didn't score. So that's my lame answer because I don't have a good
take one. It, right? Anyway, Mo, I can think of two, but I'm curious what you've got.
Probably the same two that you're thinking. One would be for Rangers in the Old Firm Derby, like 90th minute winner. So that, I mean, probably the easiest goal I probably scored in my life either as well. It was a tap in from no more than 5-6 yards out, but the impact that it had and the reaction that it got was incredible. And then the other one for me is a goal that didn't count. 2010 World Cup. We were making our comeback, this crazy comeback from being 2-0 down. Mikey scores, then Landon scores, and at that point, everyone's happy with the draw. And somehow, some way, we have a free kick, and I make my way into the box, uncontested, pretty much. And when you look back on it, we probably could have had like, what's that?
What do you mean? You pushed the guy out of the way to get
Yeah, exactly. Well, somehow, some way, I get into the box, tap in again, which seems to be the story of my life, but a tap in again, and we should have won the game 3-2, but chopped away. So one goal that actually counted and one goal that was stolen from me.
Awesome. Guys, thank you. CSS, thank you for doing this. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I appreciate you all being on. Yeah, it was good. Jacob?
Yeah, Shaw, thank you very much for leading this panel. And panelists, thank you all for joining. Maurice, I was hoping you were going to bring up that, the goal against Slovenia, or, the goal that should have been. I still very vividly remember watching that goal. So still very meaningful. But
it was 10, man.
Yeah. No, this has been fantastic. Again, appreciate you all taking the time to join us today. So with that, we're going to move on to our final panel of the day, and I'm going to transition everyone out. Shaw, you'll be sticking around and moderating the next one as well. So
bye, everybody.
Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
All right.
So hot in my room.